usually when we talk about the United States and our three sectors, kind of the traditional model is the three-legged stool. So you have the institutional services of the private sector, the public sector, and the nonprofit sector. And you can see what each one focuses in on. Another concept that I also like to share is that there's a whole other subsector out there that's non-institutional. So there's lots of associations and in informal or semi-formalized groups of citizens working together with mutual concern and common interest. So these could be neighborhood associations, book clubs. It could be a whole wide range of different types of organizations that are meeting formally or somewhat formally or very loosely. And those organizations exist and contribute a lot to society. So it's important that we consider that maybe this three-legged stool really has a fourth leg that we need to be aware of as well. And sometimes these non-institutional organizations do evolve into becoming a more formal, institutionalized type structure. So responsibilities, now that we know why people are wanting to join the board, what type of responsibilities do board members have? Everything from helping determine and update the mission and vision, hiring and selecting the executive director, supporting and evaluating the executive director, assuming that you have an executive director, and not every nonprofit does. Ensure effective planning. Someone mentioned program and service improvement, and to monitor the programs, ensuring that the organization is well funded and that proper financial oversight is occurring, building a competent board. So not just that you're a board member and you attend, but you want to continue to learn and grow and help others, new board members, learn and grow into the position. Ensuring legal and ethical integrity and enhancing the organization's public standing. So making sure that the general public understands who and what your organization is, what you're doing, and how you're benefiting your clientele and society. Legal responsibilities, basic duty of care, loyalty, and obedience. Really being informed of what the organization is doing and being a good steward. Putting aside maybe your differences with the other board members, and making sure that you're really looking at the organization's welfare and act in the best interest of the organization. And again, especially with that funding piece, making sure that you're providing that oversight, and not just of the funding, but how the funding is being used, those donated funds, as well as staying faithful to the organization's mission. And we'll talk about mission creep coming up. Now, I'm not going to go into depth with any of these legal responsibilities. Again, I've included the sources at the bottom here, but there's a whole chapter in Wisconsin state statutes on nonprofits, non-stock corporations. And there's even a whole subchapter on board of directors, what your roles and responsibilities and duties are. Most of the best practices that we're presenting today, if not all, align with what's in that chapter, but I'm not going to go through the legalese in that chapter and point out each exact thing in there to detail, because if you've ever read state statutes, they're not the most user-friendly things to read or exciting. But it's important to kind of know that, yes, as a board member, you have legal responsibilities, and you have those specific duties. And you have to also be aware that you have certain reporting requirements. If you're soliciting funding money in Wisconsin, you need to be registered. If you have gross revenues over 5,000, you need to be filling out that IRS form as well. And if you're running a raffle or using bingo to generate revenue, guess what? The UW Department of Administration Division of Gaming wants you to get a license to do that. So make sure that you research and following that properly so that you don't run into any legal challenges down the road. So I discussed what the overall board's responsibility is, but what are individual board members' responsibilities? Attending meetings is a great one, and that can be very challenging with some boards. You may face that. You may have attendance or engagement issues. It's hard to find a meeting time that works with everyone. So, it's important when you're recruiting board members to make sure that they have the ability to attend board meetings, committee meetings, or whatever. Maybe you don't have committees, maybe you have task forces or ad hoc groups, or you have fundraising group. You need to be informed of the mission and services, policies, and programs. Be prepared for the meetings by reviewing the agendas and the support documents ahead of time. Serving on committees or whatever type of subunit there may be, whether or not that's an ad hoc group or whatever ad hoc committee. Personal financial contributions, can be a touchy one with some organizations. So sometimes organizations will spell out the exact dollar amount they're looking at from each board member. Sometimes it's a contribution that's personally meaningful to you, so it kind of leaves it open, recognizing that not everybody on the board may have the same financial capabilities to donate. And sometimes organizations may leave it even broader than that it's not just money you're looking for, maybe it's talent or time. So you have connections to something, other resources, or we need you to be a working board member that helps us by spending time and working on an issue or a fundraiser with us. Informing others of the organization, suggest possible board nominees. So it's always good to help with the succession planning, so that when you leave the board, the whole board isn't left looking for a new board member, that there's some suggestions that they can follow up on. Keeping up to date, not just on what your organization is doing, but maybe what similar organizations are doing across the state and country. Following your own policies and procedures, and then refrain from making special requests from staff. Those are all. And a lot of them align pretty well with what I have on screen here. Being able to listen and analyze, willing to ask questions, think strategically, being honest, and willingness to develop new skills, right? That we all have the ability to continue to learn and stretch ourselves. That maybe something may be new to us, or a foreign concept idea, or it may be a skill that we don't currently possess, but the organization needs us to develop those skills, and we may need to stretch ourselves a little bit to do that. I appreciate the comment that was just added in the chat box too, about sometimes the people that have the best ideas also can be a pain in the butt. If you're familiar with like personality assessments and understanding differences, oftentimes those people that think different than we think, or maybe act a little bit different than we act, do bring that variety of thought and experience that we need to help get us maybe unstuck from our usual thought patterns. So yeah, having that diversity of thought and experience, as well as personalities, really does make for a richer board and team. So roles of the board chair, you can read through these. Really, the board chair working in conjunction with the executive director and helping set the agenda, setting the tone for the meetings, making sure that all board members are engaged, and that the board is operating to the best of its abilities and functioning together as a team, are all responsibilities of a board chair. Effective committees, do you need them? Oftentimes in your bylaws, they may spell out the exact committees that you need, but some organizations have found now that committees aren't the most effective way for the organization to get their business done. That it's too formalized, or too much of a long-term commitment, and it's just not effective. And I'll go through a slide a little bit about how the roles and responsibilities of committees, but sometimes organizations find like an ad hoc work group, something that's shorter term, specific activity assigned to them that they can focus in on and accomplish over a shorter period of time, versus having a committee that's just ongoing. Sometimes committees don't meet, and you have to understand and dig deeper. Do we need this committee? What are they really doing? What do they need to do? And who's accountable on that committee back to the board? So again, thinking through reviewing your bylaws, checking that, making sure that you have the committees that your bylaws say you're going to have. And if not, then it's maybe time to update your bylaws. Maybe you don't need that committee anymore. Thinking through who can be committee members. Is it just board members? Do board members serve as the committee chair and then you allow community members on the committee? There's lots of different ways to think through who needs to be on. And then, as I mentioned, committees, to be effective, they have to have clear descriptions and goals. They have to have a chair that gets involved in the committee work, have members who are willing to dig in and put in the time to accomplish the task. And then you have to think through of the committee's connection to the board. So is it the committee chair that reports to the board? Is the committee chair a board member? Just so that there's that communication link back to the board and the board's strategic goals, priorities, and the organization's mission and vision. So how are things different for different size organizations? Most in the North are very small and they may not have staff. Correct. So then you have more of the working board, right? And that's not just an issue geographically. There's lots of small nonprofits in urbanized areas as well that do not have staff. So then many of these same functions still occur, right? For board roles and responsibilities, but you don't have an executive director to assign some of these tasks to. So then is looking at, is the board chair going to take up some of these responsibilities for board orientation? Or as I said, maybe there's someone that has more tenure on the board, that's been on the board the longest, that may be the most useful at that capacity. So it's really thinking through these roles and responsibilities on your board and assigning it to specific people the task to make sure that they're being accomplished. One important consideration is a governance committee. And some organizations sometimes assign these governance functions to maybe the executive committee or some other committee as well. So you need to think about how are you going to institutionalize, document your best practices? How are you going to recruit new board members and ensure that you have a diversity of thought and perspectives? And how are you going to effectively engage the board and develop the board? So if you're a smaller board, again, these are best practices and not only practices that I'm suggesting. So you have to kind of think through what works best for you. You can't develop so much structure for your organization that you can't manage it, right? With only 8 people or 9 people, if you don't have enough people to have committees, then you don't have committees. You do it all as a board, or maybe it's teams of 2 or 3 that accomplish something together, just so that momentum continues to move forward. And also, yeah, I know, board recruitment. When I work with nonprofits in Washington County, usually the top 2 things boards are looking for when they're doing strategic planning as a result, it's how do we stabilize our funds or increase our funds? The other one is how do we recruit our board, diversify our board? How do we recruit more board members? And it is something that with a lot of organizations struggle with, because it's hard to find people that are in the community and then engage them and get them willing to serve on the board. So sometimes you may need to think about the structure and format of your board. How often do you meet? What are the expectations that you have of board members? Those should think about documenting what are your expectations? What are the requirements of serving on this board? Do you need to meet monthly? Do you need to meet every other month? Do you need to meet quarterly? What do you need to do? How do you need to meet? How do you need to communicate in order to get done the tasks that you need to accomplish? Okay, so for those organizations that have executive directors, this slide will resonate with you. So the board is more the policy setting, and the executive director is more of the, okay, how do we get this policy and actually operationalize it? So it's like the example I like to give is, for those that are familiar with canoeing, the person in the back of the canoe is the one who steers. They're the rudder. So they set the direction of where you want to go. So that's like the board. And the workhorse is actually in the front of the canoe, and they're the ones that are doing the heavy paddling to get you in the direction you want to go. So they're like the staff. So you really need to work together. Otherwise, you're just going to keep going around in circles instead of the board setting direction and the staff getting the work done. Now, if you don't have staff, then the board's doing both. You're setting the policy and you're also doing the work yourselves, or you're recruiting other volunteers to helping you do the work in the organization. So for the larger organizations that have staff, you can see the differences in the roles between what the board should be involved with and what the staff is involved with. And one thing that I like to point out on this one is evaluating the executive director and the staff. So boards really do have the responsibility. If you have staff, an executive director, your board should be doing an annual performance review of that executive director, making sure that goals are set for the upcoming year and that you're communicating throughout the year together to make sure those goals are being accomplished. And then at the end of the year, reflecting on were those goals accomplished, why or why not. Sometimes get busy, boards get busy. Sometimes you have staff turnover and board turnover, but it's really important to make sure that staff are aware, the executive director is aware of the expectations and that they're following through on that. Some of the board tools to help you address those shortcomings that you just identified. So again, you'll receive a copy of this presentation. So you'll get these tools. If you're interested in a specific tool, you can email me and I'll send it to you. So board member matrix. So thinking about when you're doing your board recruitment, what type of members do you need? Some organizations are like any live body will do, and that might not necessarily be what you need, but I understand where you're coming from, where it's really hard to find people that are willing to put in the time. Or oftentimes I hear, oh, we need a lawyer to do this, and we need a banker to be our treasurer. Well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. So there's lots of different ways to think about types of attributes you need in board members, from their expertise and leadership qualities to the resources they may have, their connections in the community, their personality styles. We talked about that before, and it's good to have those different types of personalities involved on the board. Maybe you need to think through different types of demographics, age, as well as gender and race and ethnicity, making sure that having diverse perspectives and also diverse board members. Especially one thing I like to mention with some of the organizations I work with is look at your board and then look at maybe the clientele that you're serving. And if there's a big disconnect between the two, maybe you really need to start thinking about recruiting different types of board members so that it reflects maybe the clientele that you're serving. Board assessment strategies, there's lots of different, you can Google board assessment tools and you'll get lots of different types. This is one that I use quite a bit in extension that we've adapted over the years. Where it really gets, whether or not you do this annually or maybe every 2 to 3 years or as part of a strategic planning process, really assess the board members' understandings of, is everybody clear that we have an updated mission and that we're all clear on the goals of the organization and that we have committees and they're functioning, and some personality types. Do we all get along? Do we trust each other? Do we enjoy meetings? And then how are we reporting out? Do we celebrate our successes? Do we need to get more involved with public policy? So a board assessment tool will kind of give you that snapshot in time of where you're at. And the organizations I work with, my predecessor used this tool as well. So we have probably 30 years of data now in Washington County that when I work with an organization, I can go back and track and say, okay, some of the strengths that you identified before are now opportunities you need to work on, or opportunities you had before to work on are now strengths because you've worked on them and they become strengths for your organization. So it's a great way to measure your organization over time. I mentioned orientations, different types of things you may want to consider providing an orientation tool like this out to your board. So, the history of the organizations, making sure they have all the basic policies and procedures and the incorporation documents, any plans that you have, rosters, how can they contact each other, understanding the organizational structure and tour of the facility if you have one. Who should conduct a matrix exercise like I had in the last slide? Yeah, so some organizations, the board does this themselves. So a board member can implement it, or if you had a board governance committee or an executive committee could take the lead in doing it, or you could bring in an outside facilitator to do that as well. So some organizations maybe have a national affiliate that can help with those type activities. Some organizations may need to hire a consultant, and you may have to maybe look for funding opportunities to help you fund that. Or many extension educators can help provide those programs as well if your county has a community development educator or someone else that's working with nonprofits. Most organizations call me because they want to do strategic planning. Most of the times they don't really want to do a full strategic plan. After I talk with them and we discuss what their really needed are, sometimes they just need an opportunity to think strategically together, and they need an outside facilitator to help that along and have more of a structured process, someone that can be there, observe and kind of monitor the conversation and help guide it when needed. So some people call it strategic planning, some call it thinking, there's new strategic doing is kind of a newer process. And it's all about thinking about where you're at today and where you want to go in the future. So understanding your mission, your purpose of who and what you are, your vision, where do you want to go with your organization, and then having a plan in place to kind of bridge between where you are and where you want to go by identifying those goals that will help you get there. So doing a strategic plan or having strategic conversations or strategic thinking is a process to help you get from where you're at today to where you want to go in the future. Scenario planning, some organizations find this helpful. I haven't done a lot of this myself, but I really appreciate the concept. So one way to think about scenario planning is, what's maybe a worst case now? What happens if we lose our major funder? What are some scenarios that may happen as a result of that? So you may want to think through what that may look like, and then reverse engineer a strategy then of okay, so we lose our major funding source. Here's some ideas we have in place to kind of maybe replace that funding or pivot our organization. Or what happens if we're no longer able to provide services in person? You can think through what those strategies are so that you're not left hanging there in a lurch when something like COVID-19 happens. And who can plan? I mean, how many organizations plan for that, right? It's hard to think through what those scenarios are, but you can think through, the broader cases of, like, if we lost a funding source or a major donor leaves, or maybe you have something that hit the media that wasn't favorable for your organization. How are you going to handle that scenario? Or maybe you had a windfall of money. That's always nice, right? You never know. It could happen. It has happened. I've experienced organizations actually where that has happened. So you can think through different types of scenarios where you can start plan for and be prepared for.
Paul, I'm going to add something in here. We've seen in the last year with so much disruption and change how useful scenario planning can be. And this can be something that can be part of strategic planning or strategic thinking, of looking at what are the factors of greatest uncertainty and the factors of greatest impact for the organization. It can be a simple exercise for just trying to be prepared for those things that are not in anyone's sight until they happen.
Yeah, and also I've seen people use scenario planning with visioning. So envision your ideal future, and then develop a couple scenarios and how to get there, so that you can see different routes and paths that you can take to help you be successful in reaching that vision that you've identified. I'm borrowing this from Compass Point Spectrum, and this helps you think through planning out the programs and services that you're providing on a scale here. And it's not to say that every program you're doing needs to be profitable. That's not what this is saying, but it helps you think through the programs that you have and the services that you're providing. Maybe it is a high mission program or service, but low profitability, but it's really important that we do it. That's okay. Maybe it's a program or service that brings in a lot of money, but it's not really that tied to our mission. Maybe that's okay too, because it doesn't take you much time. But maybe if it does take a lot of time and it's not really mission focused, you may want to have a conversation about, do we really need to, should we really be providing this program and service? And then if you find things falling in that bottom left quadrant, where it says low mission impact and low profitability, you may really want to think about stopping those programs. Why are you doing it? Because it's not aligned with your mission and you're not making money. And I know nonprofits, the concept of making money sometimes is hard to grasp, but oftentimes you need to find money in order to keep your operations going, right? So you need to find funding sources, whether or not it's grant funds or revenue generation or fundraiser. So it just helps you think through where your current and there could be good reasons why a program is in any one of these quadrants. And it's just important to have those conversations about why you're doing it. Again, because complacency you identified as an issue, right? That if we keep doing the same thing because we're always doing it, and then we do become complacent without stopping and thinking and reflecting on why you're doing it. So this is going to be really small on your screen, and I apologize. You can download this from Board Source, or it'll be in the handout when you receive it. It's really to think about, you should always be thinking about scenario planning. So always thinking about being prepared for recruiting new board members. If you have staff, an executive director, being prepared for an executive director transition, because you never know when that's going to happen. Ideally, it's good to know that it's well thought out and well planned out, but we don't always have that opportunity, right? Those are personal decisions that people have to make, why they want to leave a board or why they want to leave the executive director position. So having policies and procedures in place, having things documented, help ensure continuation of operations in case you have someone leave. Sharon, I believe you're probably reading the chat better than I am. Is there anything I should be commenting on?
You keep going. We're getting some comments on scenario planning, but we may go back to those.
Great, thanks. Just wanted to make sure. So I mentioned, policies and procedures. So your bylaws, making sure those are, yes, you can update bylaws. Do you need to do them yearly? Probably not. Bylaws, sometimes people are really like that and delve into updating it. Some people don't, but I've frequently run into organizations where they haven't looked at their bylaws in a long time or haven't updated them in a long time either. So it's good to make sure that bylaws are one way to kind of document how your organization is functioning and operating. Other ways to do that more frequently is to have policies and procedures. So bylaws are kind of the basic framework and structure maybe, but the policies and procedures provide more details about exactly how you're operating, functioning, and moving forward. So your bylaws wouldn't state your meeting dates in it and times, but your policies and procedures could potentially have that type of detail in there. And grievance processes, what happens if someone has a complaint? That's always good to think through before that actually happens. So sometimes if you're providing services or programs, or what happens if you do have that bad media publicity that you need to think through? What are who on your board or who on your staff is responsible for being that key contact out in the community or resolving that issue? This slide here is lots of ideas about types of financial policies and procedures that may or may not be relevant for your organization. So again, some organizations have equipment that you need to think about depreciation policies for your accounting principles. You may have property that you own, so you need to think through that. And what happens if your organization decides, okay, we've done all that we can do, or we're unable to sustain ourselves, so how do we fold? How do we dissolve, and how do we get rid of our assets? Who gets them? And that should really be spelled out, so that in case that should ever happen, you have that documented and how you actually want to deal with that situation. And it does happen, new nonprofits are being formed all the time, and some current nonprofits dissolved for a variety of reasons. Some of it's funding, some of it is related to programs and services no longer needed, and sometimes organizations may merge in with existing other organizations. So this is my last slide of content, which is great because we're getting right to 1 o'clock. And fundraising as a whole, as you can probably appreciate, a whole nother hour-long discussion. And building a fundraising culture is way more than one slide can adequately cover. So just one sliver of it is thinking through different types of board roles in fundraising. And every board member can play a role. So just because you may go, I don't like asking for money, that's not my strength. Other board members, that could be a strength. Hey, I love doing that. Meeting with people, I love doing that. But actually putting a plan together, that is too tedious for me to tackle. But other board members really might thrive in that. I like project management. I like putting a plan together. That's where I'm comfortable. And some people are all about the relationships. They want to connect with people. The fundraising aspect might really appeal to them. But they might be willing to host people together, or get out and meet people, set those introductions in place. Maybe a little bit more informally. Maybe you just have, a couple potential donors coming together, or host an event, more social. So yeah, there's lots of different roles that board members can play. So don't limit yourself to only thinking that a board member should be soliciting. And also thinking through the role of staff as well as the board in fundraising. So it's not either or, it's a both and. In thinking through donor mentality, motivations, what motivates someone to give to an organization, why would they want to give to you, all different things you want to think about when developing a fundraising plan for your organization.